Okay, now next lesson on crime and deviance, we're carrying on looking at who commits crime. For the agenda now, we're going to look at probably the big one, social class. It'll be 2 lessons on social class. So the connection between these two things, to understand the ways they are connected, thinking like a sociologist as normal. Keywords are an assumption, common knowledge, convictions, arrests, socialisation, culture, material deprivation, Marxist, anomie, means and ends and means, rational and reasonable. Right? An assumption, you think you know something before you even started, you're assuming it. Common knowledge, everyone knows that. Conviction, found guilty of a crime in court. You know what that means? That means being poor. Anomie is a new term, we'll talk about it more in a minute. It's a term from the sort of dawn of sociology, really. Ends and means, the way you get something. If something is rational and reasonable, it makes complete sense. Okay, let's crack on. Crime and class. What do we all know? Well, we all know that the working class commit more crime than the middle class. Common sense, everyone thinks they know this. And in fact, the stats say this is true. That's a criminal. They're criminals. They're not. Yeah, we all know this. Quite straightforward. Common sense tells us, common knowledge tells us that the working class commit more crime. And certainly, the stats for conviction, if you look at the stats for convictions, who's been convicted of crime, it does show a lot more working class people convicted of crime than middle class people. Prisons are full of working class people. However, just because the stats show something doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. We'll talk about that more later on in this lesson and the next lesson. But certainly, prisons are full of working class people. So let's look at some explanations as to why the working class might commit crime. Some of them we've already come across. Socialisation, already spoken about. If you're from a working class background, you're socialised into thinking crime is not as big a deal, especially theft crimes, etc., etc. Peer groups, where crime is normal in your peer group, etc., etc. Another theory is to do with education. The working class, especially males, are poorly educated. They have no way of gaining money through a good job because they're poorly educated, and therefore crime makes more sense to them. An anomie, it's close to a mental state, talked about sometimes in sociology. It's a conflict where in your head you have one part of your culture telling you not to commit crime, another part of your culture telling you you must have money to be successful. That's anomie, a conflict within your head. And some people find a way around that conflict by getting the money through crime. Yeah, we'll talk about that a lot more in class. But anomie is a conflict in your head between different parts of the culture you've learned. And there are various ways to solve this conflict. Yeah? And crime is one of these ways, is the theory. However, big however, many sociologists agree with the whole assumption that the working class commit more crime than the middle class. Yeah? Some people disagree with that. Who agrees with that? Disagrees with that, rather? What type of sociologist? Come on. Which type of sociologist says, nope, I don't agree that the problem is working class crime? Well, of course, it is Marxists. So what do Marxists say? Well, Marxists say a couple of things, don't they? They say that some working class crime is just completely rational and reasonable, but then a culture that tells them they must have money to be successful. They can't have money because they're working class, therefore they steal money. Makes perfect sense. Plus, Marxists also say that the idea of crime is part of bourgeois hegemony. You're not allowed to take the rich's stuff. They've somehow got it inside our heads that it's their stuff, the property exists. And the whole criminal justice system, the police and the courts, are set up by the bourgeoisie to control the working class, the proletariat. Big, however, too. You do not have to be a Marxist to think that the link between crime and class is more complicated than most people think. You don't have to buy into this argument to say, you know what, it is complex, crime and class, and here's an example. This here is Ashley Walters, used to be known as Asher D. And the Society Crew musician and actor. Here he is in a drama last year called Top Boy. Yeah? He has been to prison. He was jailed for possessing a gun. Yeah? If you read this, it tells you what happened. He got into a all-up with a traffic warden, drove off, never got the gun out. The police came and stopped him, and they found the gun in his car. So he did not wave the gun around, he didn't point the gun at him, but he had a gun on him. When the case went to court, this is what the judge said. The defendant, Asher D, has pleaded guilty to an extremely serious offence, having in his possession a gun loaded with live ammunition, which in combination was capable of being lethal. So judge says this is very serious, you've got a loaded gun, this is very serious. Yeah? And so, in fact, he was found guilty and given 18 months. Yeah. Now, this is the actor Tom Hardy. In case you don't know him, he's the actor in that recent Batman movie playing the bad guy Bane. And here's an article about him from the paper, admitting that when he was a kid he was a bit of a lunatic. And one thing in particular caught my eye. A couple of things really. It starts off by saying he's posh. East Sheen is quite a posh bit of London. His dad was a Cambridge-educated writer, Chips Hardy. His mum, Anne, was an artist. So he is posh. Very upper middle class. He went to a public school, a private school, but then he was expelled from this, it's called Reed, his public school in Surrey, for stealing. Arrested for joyriding in a stolen Mercedes, so he steals a Mercedes, while in possession of a gun when he was 15. And the Crown Prosecution Service, the lawyers for the government, didn't press charges. So, very, very similar crimes. But in one case, 18 months in prison. In another case, didn't even go to court. Yeah. So the link between class, in fact, and ethnicity, in fact, and crime is more complicated. And we'll talk about that more in future lessons.